was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie, please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom, boom. I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. Hello, I'm Penny ST, and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. Before we get started, I need to acknowledge what's happening in Ukraine. It is such an affront to humanity and decency. May Ukraine find safety and peace. Amen. Today we'll be speaking with Rabbi Yonatan Neril, founder and director of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development. Rabbi Yonatan is not only a rabbi and best-selling co-author of Eco-Bible, but his passion is for a sustainable earth, and he works with fervor to protect the planet with interfaith groups of Jews, Muslims, and Christians holding conferences on ecology in Jerusalem. In February, when I had my pre-interview with Rabbi Yonatan, he was the first person to share with me his concerns about the 15 nuclear reactors in the Ukraine, including the largest, and the potential damage if they were attacked during a war with Russia. He'll be able to shed light on what, as a world, we are facing with the nuclear attacks and threats from Russia, as well as our ongoing environmental issues that need to be addressed. Additionally, we'll talk about his years of work to bring attention to the environmental health of our planet by working with all faiths to protect our world from harm. With that, Rabbi Yonatan, welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Rabbi Yonatan, I would like to start with what the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development's mission is. And so I'd like to show a video clip of Rabbi Yonatan's belief that we have a spiritual crisis of human beings, and that has never been more evident than the last few weeks.
The Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development mission is to catalyze the transition to a sustainable, thriving, and spiritually aware society through the leadership of faith communities. I want to share a brief quote from Dr. Gus Speth, who was the former dean of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. He said, "I used to think that if we threw enough good science at the environmental problems, we could solve them. I was wrong. The main threats to the environment are not biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change, as I once thought. They are selfishness and greed and pride. And for that, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, something we scientists don't know much about. The ecological crisis, in my view, is actually messaging that religion needs to step up to the plate. Because the ecological crisis is not a crisis of the birds and the bees or the trees and the toads. It's a crisis of the human being. and of how we live as spiritual beings in a physical reality. And therefore, the response to the ecological crisis, if for the issue really to be addressed, has to be addressed at the deeper level in regards to spirituality and religion and faith. And that's why it's so important that we're here today, in order to look at how theological education can speak to these issues. It's not also just about addressing ecology and environmental justice, which are very important. It also has an effect on theological education itself, because as you know, many young people today seek in their theological studies to know, how does my faith relate to these issues that I'm concerned about? And by speaking to them and relating ecology to religion, or finding how ecology flows organically from religion, as Pope Francis so clearly has demonstrated, that also helps to renew the relevance of religion in modern society. So thank you for coming today, and I look forward to interacting with all of you.
And with that, I believe what Putin's been doing these last few weeks speaks to not only a crisis for ecological devastation, but for the capacity of man's inhumanity to other humans. How would you describe what Putin is doing to Ukraine and the impact on the rest of the world, Rabbi?
Well, first of all, I think it's not just Putin. I think that there's a lot of sort of meta issues that are involved here, in terms of, how is it that that Russia has such a large military? Where does it get its money from? Russia provides about 10% of the oil revenue in the world, in the oil production, in terms of the number of barrels or millions of barrels of oil that it produces. So that's one factor in the equation, in terms of humanity's addiction to oil. And another factor that I've been focusing on in my work is the relation of religion to the current conflict, in terms of what role the Russian Orthodox is playing in relation to the conflict, and how it can play a role that would be promoting peace instead of the opposite.
I'd like to take a look at some slides and have you comment on them. The first shows that there are 15 nuclear reactors in Ukraine.
Yes, so this is something that I wrote about in the Times of Israel blog post right at the beginning of the war, that this is the first conflict in history that's taking place amidst active nuclear reactors. So you can see on the left is Ukraine's Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant, and it has several reactors. And then on the right is Ukraine's Zaporizhia nuclear power plant on the Dnieper River. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is actually the largest in Europe, with 6 reactors. You can see these 6 different buildings and smokestacks, and those are each a nuclear reactor. And Russia and Ukrainian militaries were fighting a battle right near there, with apparently Russian artillery exploding a building in the nuclear reactor complex that Ukrainian firefighters successfully put out. And also in the Chernobyl reactor, there's where there was also a fight. The electricity has now been dismantled and it's operating on the backup generators. So, we're really in new territory, and it's just showing that we're playing with fire, and that peace is so essential here. It's not just it's about the future of many people, and really of humanity.
Yeah. Given the events of the last few weeks, with Russia attacking Ukraine, with at minimum the indiscriminate and perhaps intentional rocket attacks of the nuclear facilities, can you give us some insight of the dangers these attacks pose?
Well, we saw what happened in Chernobyl in 1986, which was an accident. And it's, it really is, there's the risk of nuclear meltdown. There's the risk of nuclear waste sites, because there's also large amounts of nuclear waste that are stored near these reactors and in other sites, including one near Kiev. And then aside from the nuclear factor, there's also oil storage tanks and gas and oil and gas pipelines, as well as the lead from the bullets and bombs. So, this is an example of how war affects the environment, and how, especially in a war in a place like Ukraine, which is, heavily industrialized during Soviet times and afterward, and is a main artery for the transport of fossil fuels, of oil and gas from Russia, along with being one of the major countries that produce nuclear energy for much of its electricity. So it's not like it's not like the Battle of Gettysburg that's taking place, on an open field and on hills and in forests. There was very significant nuclear and oil and gas sites that are part of the battlefield that is taking place now.
Yeah, it's terrifying, actually. As a clergyman, what would you say God would say about all this?
Well, I know that the scripture, the Holy Scripture in the Bible, talks about the need for peace and the importance of peace, shalom. And God wants people to get along with each other. In the first children of Adam and Eve were Cain and Abel, and Cain killed Abel. And that was a sorrowful event. God didn't want Cain to kill Abel. God even told him, you have the choice about how you behave, how you act. And so too in our case, Russia does not need to be fighting with Ukraine. The peoples have a lot in common. They are Slavic peoples. They speak similar languages. A lot of Ukrainians speak Russian. They're intermarried. A lot of Ukrainians have Russian relatives. Russians have Ukrainian relatives. They eat similar foods. The biggest religion in each country is Orthodox Christianity, but they also have Muslims and atheists and Jews and other religious people as part of their countries. And so, the other is a brother of a different mother. It's not about us versus them. It's about us and them and how we get along with each other. That would be my message to Putin at this moment.
Have you heard from your fellow interfaith leaders, and what's their reaction been?
Well, I've been involved in organizing an interfaith letter to Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church, in collaboration with the Swedish Theological Institute in Jerusalem and the Elijah Interfaith Institute that's also based in Jerusalem. And we, over the past couple of weeks, have delivered a letter to Patriarch Kirill, as well as Metropolitan Hilarion, who's the #2 person in the Russian Orthodox Church, calling on them to speak with President Putin about seeking peace. And this interfaith letter was signed by 150 religious leaders, including very senior religious leaders like the Dalai Lama and cardinals of the Catholic Church, as well as rabbis and priests and imams.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I'd like to switch out from this particular conversation into, I like to talk to peace activists such as yourself about their own personal journeys, what's happening in their lives, just to show folks that, we're certainly my story. I mean, before I got into all this peace activity, I was a stay-at-home mom. So are you married? Do you have kids?
I am married. I'm married to Shayna, and we have 2 children. We're blessed with 2 children.
Awesome. And what languages do you speak?
I speak English, obviously, and Hebrew and Spanish.
And you have a very interesting story about speaking Spanish. Could you talk about your past in Cuba?
Sure. When I was in college, I studied for a semester at the University of Havana.
And you grew up in California, right? Northern
I grew up
California?
in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I grew up on an acre of land with an organic garden. I garden with my mother amidst trees. And when I was in college, I studied for a semester at the University of Havana and took courses in Latin American history and literature. And it was a very eye-opening experience for me.
And when did you move to Israel?
I moved to Israel about 19 years ago. In 2003, I initially came to study here for a year, and I then met my wife and have been here since.
Were your parents interested in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Yeah, they were concerned, and read about it. And after I moved here, a number of years later, my parents moved here. And two of my siblings also live here now. So most of my immediate family lives in the Jerusalem area, I'm happy to say.
Wonderful, wonderful. That makes it a lot better for you.
Mhm.
Everybody followed you, huh?
Yeah,
When you're, sorry.
I had a brother who was also here for a little time before me, so it wasn't just me. He actually came first.
Very nice. So obviously you were living on an organic, working on an organic garden. So what was your path to being concerned about the environment?
Well, it was partly where I grew up. When I was in 5th grade, I went to an environmental education week in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And then every summer from the age of 10, I went to Camp Tawonga, which is a Jewish summer camp near Yosemite. And that was where I was first exposed to the connection between Judaism and ecology. And then when I was in college, I also took a number of courses in environmental studies and did research in India and in Mexico on environmental issues.
And what got you interested in your interfaith work?
Well, when I was in college, also in California, I lived for a term with a Muslim man from Saudi Arabia. And he would wake up in the middle of the night to pray and early in the morning, and then I would wake up to pray. And I realized that it was possible to coexist with him. I was also involved in college in Jewish Arab Muslim dialogue, in a dialogue group that was facilitated by the university. So those experiences sort of first introduced me to interfaith dialogue, and then I've pursued that in terms of environmental issues.
And how do you work on peace in your work?
Well, in a number of ways. Right now, I'm involved in organizing an interfaith gathering in Jerusalem of religious leaders to publicly call for peace in Ukraine. And this event is going to be held at Moscow Square in Jerusalem, which is near a Russian Orthodox church. And we are expecting the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, who's the senior Catholic leader, along with Custos of the Holy Land, another Catholic leader, and a chief rabbi of Israel, as well as Muslim religious leaders. So this is an example of Israelis and Palestinians coming together to call for peace in Ukraine. That's one example of the peace building efforts that I'm engaged in now.
Fantastic. Why did you start the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development?
Why did I start it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I realized that there's a deep connection between religion and ecology, but that connection is not known to most people, including many people who consider themselves religious. So I started the organization in order to reveal the connection between religion and ecology and mobilize people to act. And I believe that religion is one of the undertapped forces in the world for ecological change. Religion is the largest NGO. Religious organizations have large land holdings, media institutions, educational institutions. And so there's a great potential for change, with religion coming to bear on the ecological crisis.
Well, I think that is a good opening to get back and talk about Ecological, which is a #1 bestseller in several areas. So can you talk about the book Eco Bible that you co-wrote?
Sure. So Eco Bible is an ecological commentary on the Pentateuch, or the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Volume 1 is on Genesis and Exodus. Volume 2 is on Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's a book that includes commentary on about 400 verses in the Hebrew Bible from an ecological perspective. And some of these commentaries also relate to war and peace and the linkages between violent conflict and ecological impact. So I've come to the realization that humanity can try to live sustainably from an ecological perspective, but that's only going to work if we can get along with each other. And humanity can try to live in peace with each other, but that's only going to work as long as we have ecological sustainability. So the two go hand in hand, and in a number of Eco-Bible commentaries that comes out.
What are the specific environmental challenges in the Holy Land?
So it's an important question. There's a number of ecological challenges. One of them relates to fossil fuel use. There's a significant amount of gas that is off of the Mediterranean coast of Israel, and which in recent years Israel has begun exploiting, such that now Israel is burning that gas at a number of power plants to provide electricity for the people living here. But that causes air pollution, as well as there's a chance of a gas leak on the coast. There was also a tar spill that occurred about a year and a half ago. It was likely from an Iranian-linked tanker that intentionally leaked a shipload of tar into the Mediterranean, and then that went off of the Israeli coast, and then it went onto the coast. And there's still tar on a lot of rocks, even though there's been massive cleanup efforts. So that's another example of how conflict between people spills out into the environment. It's not that as like we can contain the conflict and the fighting between people, because we live amidst nature. When people fight, nature suffers. You can see that in these images of Ukraine, of these burned out trees, and that's also the case here in Israel.
You feel the environment can actually play a key role in peacemaking. Why and how?
So one of the ways that my organization has worked is that we bring people together, Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, around ecological sustainability. Interfaith dialogue, for the sake of interfaith dialogue, can get a little boring and not go so far. But when we have a joint goal, which is living on the land together, living sustainably on the land, then people can come to collaborate with each other. So, and the differences between us are less significant when we see the commonalities that we have of sharing this land together, the land that God gave people to serve as stewards and to live sustainably on.
So what's the mission of your organization?
Our mission is to reveal the connection between religion and ecology and mobilize people to act.
I have a number of projects that you work on, and so I'd like to go over them. Okay, so can you talk about this project here?
This is our Seminary Faith and Ecology project. This is a picture from a conference that we co-organized. There's a picture of Dr. Laurel Kearns, from professor at Drew Theological Seminary in New Jersey, at a conference that we held in Los Angeles. We've been involved in co-organizing 12 conferences, half in Jerusalem and half in the United States, that are focused on encouraging seminary deans and faculty to teach and preach on religion and ecology. So here in Israel, we've had students and faculty from Israeli and Palestinian institutions, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. In the last conference that we held, we had a group of Bedouin sheikhs from the city of Rahat come and attend and speak at the conference, together with rabbis and priests and pastors. So again, we're bringing together religious leaders and clergy and seminary students around an issue that we all care about, and so this is one avenue of our work.
Great. And you have the Interfaith Environmental Conferences.
Yeah, so this is a picture that we took of the Jordan River when we held a seminar. You can actually see that there's some people in the right in the middle, where we brought together a group of clergy and seminary students to talk about water and the Jordan River. Unlike other countries, there aren't major rivers in Israel, and the Jordan River, this is sort of showing it at its best. Farther on, it comes to a sort of a trickle, and that is mostly from untreated sewage water that reaches it. And so we help to educate clergy about the challenge of being stewards of the water and enabling nature also to get a drink, and not having people, in this case, Israelis, Lebanese, Jordanians, Syrians, and Palestinians, take the water that would otherwise take all of the water that would otherwise flow into the Jordan River.
So here's another Interfaith Ecology Conference.
Yeah, so these are some pictures from the conference the last conference that we held in Jerusalem. On the left is a picture of a Bedouin sheikh from Rahat, together with rabbinical students, and the picture on the right is another Bedouin sheikh with me and a Catholic seminary student and a Hindu woman. So these pictures show what can happen when people get together and really care together about the land that we share.
And here you have Israel tours and Jewish ecology seminars.
That's right. So we also work with a range of groups that are visiting the Holy Land on ecological issues, and we work with interfaith groups and then also with specific groups. We have a close relationship with the Swedish Theological Institute and lead tours in Mea Sha'arim. That's also an interesting encounter between Christian clergy and the Haredi, or ultra-Orthodox community in Jerusalem. That's another form of coexistence, is sort of encountering people that are different than us, but our tours mix religion and ecology with an encounter of the land. We've also held tours in what's called the Kidron Valley, which is a lower part of Jerusalem, in a section of East Jerusalem, and looking at the water situation in Jerusalem and some of the complexities there. And we've done such a tour with Israeli-Palestinian and Jordanian students from the Arava Institute.
What impact would you say that has on the students? What are they surprised at? All of the issues that they learn about, or is it doesn't seem like these are well-known issues, or are they?
Yeah, I agree with you that it's a little bit off the radar. This whole topic of connecting religion and ecology isn't necessarily front and center on a lot of people's consciousness, but this is another slide of our women's interfaith ecology project. Here we're bringing together women for a tree planting and gardening session and a meal on the right. Sisterhood and sustainability are more connectors than the issues that divide us. And so through this women's interfaith ecology project, we were able to bring together Israeli and Palestinian women, Muslims, Christians, and Jews for a series of seminars on religion and ecology.
Is that organized through some women's groups as well, or how did that work?
What we did collaborate with some women's groups, and there was a woman's coordinator who led it. It wasn't me who was doing that work.
Do women add a different perspective to your work?
I think so. I think that, as I said, the sisterhood among women when they come together is a source of commonality that can help to overcome the differences. And I think that women also can be, perhaps less connected to the violent conflict and to sort of this expansionist tendency of some people, and can add a voice of moderation that can help to promote peace.
I know that you also did a faith-inspired renewable energy project in Africa. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So that's another part of our work. We're collaborating with an Israeli renewable energy company called Global. It's based in Jerusalem and working to deploy commercial scale solar field on church lands in Africa. And so we have one project that we've been working on for a number of years in Mozambique, in one of the poorest countries in the world, where most of the people don't have access to electricity. And we're working with an Anglican church in Nyasa province of Mozambique to deploy a commercial scale solar field.
Well, often Israelis and Palestinians may live close to one another, but they even work together, but they don't socialize. How old were you when you first interacted with a Palestinian? That, more that you were talking to them and not just passing.
So my first real encounter with a Palestinian was at when I came to Israel when I was 22, and I attended a 3-day retreat that was put on by the Interfaith Encounter Association. This was during the Second Intifada, and but nevertheless, I was able to meet and spend several days with a group of Palestinian young people and interact with them. That was probably my first experience of having meaningful interactions with them. I've also taken a course in Arabic here in Jerusalem at the Jerusalem Intercultural Center, and that, even though I don't speak good Arabic by any means, but just knowing basic Arabic enables me to have basic conversations with taxi drivers or other Palestinians that I come in contact with in my day-to-day life, and I find that that's a real bridge. That knowing a little bit of their language is a real bridge, actually. I have here a dictionary, an English Arabic pocket dictionary.
Right.
That I have.
Right. So with what's going on in Israel right now, do you think the situation is improving between the Israelis and Palestinians, or getting worse, or about the same? How would you describe the interactions?
It's a good question. It's hard to assess. I think that the current government in Israel is encouraging, in the sense that for the first time, there is a Israeli Arab political party that is actively taking part in the coalition, and the Ram party, led by Mansour Abbas. I'm actually working with a member of Knesset, Alon Tal, to organize an interfaith ecology event at the Knesset as well as a group of religious leaders going to the burn site of the Jerusalem forest. There was a fire last year to sort of bear witness together to the fire. So I am encouraged by the government, even though it's not, it's not ideal by probably anyone's imagination. But I do think that there is an improvement over the previous government.
What about your efforts and interactions with the different faiths? Between the different faiths, do you see new opportunities opening up that weren't there before? Has there been progress toward working together?
Well, this event that I'm organizing on Monday, this interfaith gathering in relation to calling for peace in Ukraine, is actually a unique opportunity of Israelis and Palestinians to come together to call for peace in Ukraine. That's sort of one of the silver linings of the conflict in Ukraine, is that it's sort of forming, coalitions or helping people to come together in ways that they may not have in the past. So I'm looking forward to that. And, we're continuing with our work. There continue to be sort of structural issues in this land that make peace more difficult. For example, there are in general, Israelis and Palestinians don't interact with each other on a daily basis.
Right.
And so therefore that makes it difficult to, it's sort of like, it's two peoples living on one land, and it's in a way we're married because neither people is going anywhere, despite the fantasies of some people on each side. And so therefore, at a certain level, we need to figure out how to get along with each other. I actually went recently, I heard a class that was talking about an Israeli poet named Avot Yeshurun, who won the Israel Prize for poetry. And I went to a class from a scholar on his poetry, Ariel Reznikov. And at the end of one of his poems is a poem called Siftach, which is an Arabic word. And at the end of the poem, he says, Zuzu ksat v'nichye v'lo namut. Move a little, and we will live and won't die. And this is actually the Nichye v'lo namut is actually quoting the Bible, where Jacob says, it's a play on Genesis chapter 47, of where why it says, why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh. And so, but this idea that both sides need to compromise. We can't have everything. It's sort of like in a relationship, in a married relationship. If one party wants to do everything, get everything, it's not going to work. We need to be givers. And so sort of a spiritual root of the conflict is a mentality of wanting to be takers, and wanting to have it all, and not wanting to accommodate the narrative of the other people. I attended a course in nonviolent communication that was also attended by a Palestinian activist who's a co-founder of Combatants for Peace. And I feel like there's a
interviewed them.
Yes. So I feel like there's a need to acknowledge the other's narrative instead of just sort of holding strong on each side's narrative and saying, we're right, they're wrong. There's no accommodation. I can't see the other side, which can be threatening for some people to sort of acknowledge that. But if we just keep insisting that we're right and the other side's totally wrong, we know where that leads, and it doesn't lead to a good place.
Do you have any projects specifically with Israelis and Palestinians?
Yes, so, because of the pandemic, our in-person projects have been on hold. So we've held projects in the past, these conferences that I mentioned, workshops that have brought together seminary students, women, clergy. But the event we're holding on Monday, this interfaith gathering of religious leaders, will also, inshallah, with God's help, also include Israelis and Palestinians.
And I don't believe there's a lot of interfaith eco cooperation taking place in Jerusalem. Do you want to talk about why that is and what you're trying to do to improve it?
Sure. I mean, first of all, the amount of funding that is supporting interfaith environmental cooperation is a drop in the bucket. And is a tiny fraction of the budget of any one of the major museums in the city. So that's one factor that my organization and others who are working in the field can only do so much with the resources that we have. But as I said earlier, a lot of people don't actually see this connection between religion and ecology. They don't appreciate that there is this connection, and that connecting religion and ecology has the potential to bring people together and has a potential for peace building. And so that's, I think, part of what's sort of been limiting the growth in this area as well.
Are there any specific issues between Israelis and Palestinians ecologically that are specific to them, and like an issue that you work with that you would build around? I'm curious if there are any, because of the locations of the two where they come together, that it causes ecological problems.
Yeah, so I'll give you one example. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is the example of the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem. Jerusalem's a city of about 900,000 people, and in Jerusalem, 1/3 of the sewage goes to the Dead Sea through the Kidron Valley, but it's not treated. Since throughout history there hasn't been a sewage treatment plant, Israelis and Palestinians haven't been able to agree on a sewage treatment plant. Because the treated sewage water is a commodity. It's then reused for agriculture, and they haven't been able to agree on who will get that water. Until just now, in the past couple of years, the Jerusalem municipality has been building such a treatment plant. I'm not sure that it's online yet. And so this is an example.
Isn't that dangerous to use such water untreated?
Well, the water mostly flows untreated to the Dead Sea, to the northern Dead Sea, and contributes to the water in the Dead Sea. I'm not aware of any studies that have shown what effect this untreated sewage has on the water quality of the Dead Sea and near the beaches that people swim in. But I mean, that's sort of an example of how, because of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, who can even think about measuring that and addressing that? And so that's why ecological issues have sort of been on a low flame, on the back burner, because the violent conflict has been on the front burner. And yet, if we don't address climate change, none of us are going to be able to live in this land. So this
I've been reading about how even for COVID that they've been evaluating the sewage water to find out where the breakouts of COVID are by analyzing the sewage water.
Yeah, for COVID and also for some other diseases like polio. Yeah, that is the case. There's a lot we can learn from the sewage.
Yeah, and I was just reading this morning about because of the lack of vaccinations of many, or opportunity for vaccinations of Ukrainians, the immigrants and some of the diseases that we've eradicated here, for instance, in the United States, aren't eradicated there, and they're concerned about that as well. But anyway, that's that. Sorry, that just an article I was reading this morning. What about what happened in May? What did that impact your work at all?
You said what happened in Maine?
No, what happened in May 2021? The violence in May, did that impact your work?
Yeah, the violence in May did. You know, I've been here long enough. I've been here about half of my life, that I see that there are, the land goes, and the people in the land sort of go through these periodic bursts of violence. It's sort of like a rash that gets inflamed, or a marital conflict that resurfaces. And that partly has to do with not addressing the roots of the conflict, and that so when the roots of the conflict remain untouched, then the symptoms reappear over time, and you know, people are able to sort of suppress those symptoms, and the conflict doesn't get too out of hand. Although, you know, similar to what we're seeing in Ukraine, in the war in May between Israel and Hamas, the Hamas is now shooting in these conflicts, Hamas now shoots rockets at Israel's Dimona nuclear reactor, and it also shoots rockets at the desalination plants that provide water for millions of people, as well as at the power plants that generate electricity. And so, you know, the costs of war and the potential for much more serious conflict. I mean, if you know, God forbid, Hamas were to hit the nuclear reactor, it would not only poison their nests, but it could poison the land from now till kingdom come. And so it just shows that, you know, we need peace. Peace isn't just a nice thing. To live on this land in the long term will require that we live peacefully with each other. And that goes for the land here where I am, and it goes for on Earth. It goes for Russia and Ukraine. It goes for the whole Earth. It can't continue that humanity lives in a level of fear and fighting with each other. We need to raise our level of spiritual awareness so that we come to see the image of the divine in the other, so that we can know and see the humanity and the goodness in other people. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, who was from Ukraine, from Berdichev in central Ukraine, said, "Why did God give us two eyes? So that with one eye we could see the good in another person, and with one eye we could see our own deficiencies and how we can improve in ourselves." But oftentimes what happens is that with one eye we see the good in ourselves, and with the other eye we see the deficiencies in other people.
Really. Unfortunately, between the Israelis and the Palestinians have lived in war for so many years. And a lot of what we're seeing in the news, I have to admit, when I see the bombing and hear the sirens and so on in Ukraine, I kind of relive my trip from 2014. The benefit of what's going on with today's technology, the benefit of the technology, not the benefit of what's going on, but is that everyone can see what it's like. You don't necessarily feel it completely, but if you've been through it, you do. I think it's kind of like PTSD personified, but it's ugly, but a good thing that people see how horrific it is. But I think so much of what I'm seeing in the conflict now there, I've seen repeatedly in the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. What lessons, if you could say not that the Ukrainians had anything to do with the fact they're in this mess now, but what lessons would you say that you've learned with your conflict that could be perhaps help the Ukrainians with dealing with it? I mean, all these years you've had to deal with these attacks and so on. Are there any, is there any advice you can give them as they go through this horrific situation?
Well, I'm aware that in ancient Ukraine and Russia, there was an institution called the Vech, which was a communal council that would meet in the town square and vote on different matters and sort of serve also as a conflict resolution mechanism. Also in pre-Islamic Middle Eastern cultures, there was a sulha, which was an intercommunal dispute management and resolution practice, which is still in use today. So, you know, my hope and my prayer is that the conflict in Ukraine will end soon, and that they won't have to deal with a prolonged conflict, even though since 2014 in Eastern Ukraine, there has been a you know, low-level conflict that I think has killed 10,000 people.
Oy.
Yeah, and that's been going on now for 8 years.
Mm.
But as I said before, we're living in times that our ancestors have been dreaming about for thousands of years. And to give a different metaphor, it's sort of like the ship Titanic. We're dealing with issues now in terms of ecological sustainability, like climate change, biodiversity loss, that if we don't address these issues, then, you know, may God help us, because we can't live on a planet that is overheated, and actually the climate change is making it hotter in the Middle East and drier, and that was one of the sources of the Syrian civil war. The worst drought in at least 900 years hit the Middle East between 2006 and 2010, and hundreds of Syrian farmers had to leave their farms and went to Syrian cities, which destabilized the country. That was one factor in the Arab Spring. And so we need to learn to get along with each other, sort of like on the ship Titanic. If we see the iceberg ahead and the captain says, okay, I need help now in running down to the engine room and reversing the engines, and he runs into the restaurant and he says, I need 50 people now to come help me. But he sees that there's a bar fight between, you know, the Russians and Ukrainians are fighting here, and the Israelis and Palestinians are fighting here, and the different ethnicities in Ethiopia are fighting there, and the Indians and Pakistanis, and et cetera, et cetera. And the captain is like, throws up his hands. Oh Lordy, we need to reverse the engines. We see the iceberg ahead, and yet we're so sort of weighed down by these conflicts, by fighting with each other. I mean, this could bring down all of humanity, and you know, so, and it's not, you know, I mean, I think we're sort of waking up to this from the fact that you know, Putin and Russia have 6,000 nuclear warheads. Like, you know, these are the stakes. The stakes are very high here. This isn't just a little, you know, two kids fighting in a sandbox.
So let's say something did hit a just one nuclear reactor. What would be the potential for damage? I
mean, you know, my hope and prayer is for peace, and
sure.
I'm sure you can Google, you know, you can Google Chernobyl 1986, and learn about or Fukushima in 2011, because humanity's already been through two nuclear, at least partial nuclear meltdowns. But so this is why we need to strengthen our peacemaking efforts. It's, you know, the peacemakers of the world. It's also, again, going back to this event and the importance of religious peacemakers, that humanity sort of puts its hope in political and military leaders being able to address the conflict in Ukraine. and even to address it here in Israel. That's something that one of my teachers, Rabbi Michael Melchior, is involved in, and Rabbi Menachem Fruman of blessed memory was involved in, is religious peacemaking. That most people in this land connect to a religion, whether it's Islam or Judaism or Christianity, and religion needs to be part of the peacemaking process. And that also goes for the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. There's a dispute between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and that dispute is contributing to this conflict. And so we need religious peacemakers to try to bring peace between religious people.
What would you, speaking of positive things, what would you consider your greatest accomplishments at the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development? You've been around for 12 years. How about a little bragging? What would you say that you feel really great about your efforts?
Well, I'm grateful for the publication of Eco Bible in 2 volumes, which is the first ever ecological commentary on the Hebrew Bible, on 400 verses. I'm also grateful for the 12 conferences that we've organized that have brought together over 1,000 people, mostly clergy and people who were seminary students but are now clergy, who are now teaching in hundreds of congregations. And they have the experience of having spent a full day with the other and interacted with them. And now they're less ignorant of who the other is, and whether they're in the West Bank or Jerusalem or elsewhere. I believe that these conferences and workshops that we've held have really impacted the hearts and minds of, at least 1,000 clergy who are now having a ripple effect and a multiplier effect in the hundreds of congregations that they're now teaching and preaching at.
Awesome. Now, hopefully with COVID becoming less and less, and you're able to begin again live interactions, etc. So what's the next phase for Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development? What would you like to be working on for the next 5 years?
It's a great question. We actually have a page on our website called Aspirational Projects. Here's what we do if we doubled our budget or tripled or quadrupled our annual budget. One of the things that we'd like to do is to scale the religion and ecology movement. I'm involved with a collaborative of directors of other faith and ecology NGOs, and we're reaching out to some major funders about the possibility of scaling this movement to really amplify and raise up the religion and ecology voice. We'd like to create a physical center here in Jerusalem that would enable us to host these workshops. We'd like to do these conferences and workshops on a regular basis, as well as help to train others and to do this not just in Jerusalem, but in Haifa and other places in this land.
Well, hopefully you will get the blessing of those donors and continue your fantastic work. Thanks so much, Rabbi Yonatan. What you've had to say is so important, particularly at this strange and critical juncture of the planet as Ukraine is being pummeled by war, and we're all threatened intentionally or by what's going on. But next week on March 22nd at 11 a.m. Pacific time, we'll be speaking with Shireen Bachchan of the legal organization Itach Ma'aki, Women Lawyers for Social Justice. Women Lawyers for Social Justice was established in 2001 in Israel to give voice to women subject to social, geographic, national, ethnic, and economic discrimination in Israeli society. The association's vision is that Israeli law will reflect the unique perspectives of women from all social groups and ensure that they are able to fully exercise their rights in Israel as it is in the United States and Europe. Still struggle to be heard, and Itach Maki helps ensure they're successful in protecting women's rights. We hope you will join us, and for now, we'll leave you as we pray that everyone will someday live in peace, shalom, and salam.